Okay, I'm now going to move on. That's my theoretical comment. I'm now going to move on briefly to discuss some aspects of the practical impact of immigration on equality. Essentially what happened in the U.S. was in 1965, the country had the option of either being Switzerland with a relatively smaller population, because all races were stabilizing their birth rates, the family size, so that the state population was stabilizing, heavily white, very homogeneous, highly educated, very productive. Or they could decide to be Brazil. In other words, very diverse, chaotic, rampant poverty, tremendous income inequality. And of course, what's actually happened is the U.S. is in the process of becoming Brazil, with gated communities and so on. It happens. Look at the income impact, the impact on income. It happens, and it's greatly the discredit of the Bush administration that it didn't do something about this, that the median income of American workers, for most people actually, if you look at most of the quintiles of, deciles rather, in income distribution, most people have experienced stagnant income for 30 years. Now, one of the reasons for that is immigration. For a long time, the immigration impact on American wages was denied. In other words, the law of supply and demand had apparently been repealed. But, over time, the evidence comes in. And in 2003, George Borjas, who is a Cuban himself, generally speaking, it's only the immigrants who are prepared to talk about immigration in this country. We're doing a dirty job that you won't do. His journal, Quarterly Journal of Economics article in 2003 demonstrated beyond argument that there really is an impact on wages, and it spreads right through every level of income, by the way, and it affects even college graduates, but it's particularly harsh on the lesser skilled. Another way of looking at the impact of immigration is the population that's in poverty. If you look at the government poverty numbers, they're really quite extraordinary on a chart. They fall like a stone from the 1930s, 1940s, through about 1972. In 1972, the proportion of Americans in poverty was 11.3%. And it's been around there ever since. It's been oscillating up and down, but essentially been moving sideways for 30 years. Now, immigration exacerbates this poverty problem, it really in two ways. Directly, many of those people in the poverty population are themselves immigrants, or the children of immigrants. We calculated somewhere around about a third of them are either post-1965 immigrants or their US-born children. The second effect is indirect. Immigrants compete with and displace native-born Americans, and that in turn drives them into poverty. So that's why I think a major reason why the poverty level has been so irreducible. I mean, we've had two tremendously long booms here in the 80s and the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, tremendous long booms here. And yet we've still been able to get poverty below the level where it was in 1972. One of the reasons is immigration. It's no accident that both of these problems developed 30 years ago, exactly when the effect of the 1965 Immigration Act kicked in. I'm not saying immigration is the cause of widening income inequality in the U.S., but I am saying that it's a cause and it should be discussed. But in fact, conventional economic debate invariably leaves it out. And I've had a terrible time as a financial journalist getting editors to let me write about it. I'm going to leave you with two closing thoughts which arise out of my long experience in the conservative wars, Paul, even if I still have more hair. The first one, is that nobody actually knows. I've concluded that nobody actually knows what's politically possible, least of all professional politicians. They don't go around thinking about what's going to happen in 5 years or even 5 weeks from now. They just react from day to day. In 1975, I came down to New York from Canada, where I then lived, and I interviewed Bill Rusher, the publisher of National Review, about his attempt to start a third party. Very good idea, by the way, and it's a shame it didn't work. Anyway, when Russia, we compared and sent a number of signals out in the way that you do. I said, I work for John Ashbrook. It is true, actually. I worked for John Ashbrook, Ashbrook, not Ashcroft, against Nixon in 1972. And he, of course, had been a great supporter of Ashbrook. He said to me, confidentially off the record when the interview was finished, he said, I think that it's all over. And this is 1975, and the red flag will one day fly over the world. He said the last chance we had to turn things around was 1968, when Reagan, you may not remember this, but some of you, but Reagan actually ran against Nixon in that year, and actually came quite surprisingly close to winning. He was stopped by Strom Thurmond. Thurmond was the one who held the South for Nixon. Anyway, Russia said that he thought all was lost and the red flag would one day fly over the world, off the record. He said to me, but we keep on going. One reason is you never know what's going to turn up. And the second reason is there are theological injunctions against despair. Well, 5 years later, Reagan was in the White House. Things had changed around with extraordinary speed. Similarly, and again, the people in this room who perhaps don't remember this, but the power of the Soviet Union is omnipresence in the way we went around thinking about it every day and about the possibility of nuclear war and what they were up to and all over the world and so on. It's hard to remember now, but it was a central fact of political life for a long time, and nobody predicted that the Soviet Union was going to collapse. I interviewed Selwyn Biala, who was supposed to be the great criminologist, in 1986 for Forbes. That was just 4 years before the Soviet Union collapsed. And he had no idea it was going to collapse. He spent his entire life studying it. He had absolutely no idea. So, because of that, I conclude that the ghost of the Soviet Union, because that's what this equality stuff really is, it's the unquiet ghost of Stalinism, can be exercised. It appears to be all-powerful now, but it can be exercised, and it will be. The second conclusion I've come to about politics is actually not really about politics. It's about my day job as a financial journalist. It's an axiom in the stock market that things that can't go on forever don't. And, it sounds odd, but for 6 or 7 years now, it's been obvious that the stock market has been massively overvalued. And it was so obvious that the people who were saying this, almost all of them eventually gave up because it kept on going up anyway. But it turned out that it couldn't go on forever, and it didn't. And that's how I feel about American politics right now. I think that whites, that is to say Americans, will organize. They will ultimately throw off the leadership they currently have. I think immigration will become an issue, and it will become an important part of that organization process. With your help. And this brings me to who I think, the single statesman I think you all resemble. It has to be George Washington. Not just because of intelligence, but actually because of his character and courage. And, the heroic rethinking that they did between about 1750 and 1775 to reformulate the American idea and what the future of the American nation was going to be. Of course, from my point of view, George Washington was a rebel too. But that's what we need. We need a rebellion. And I want to thank our hosts here, my hosts, for fomenting it. Thank you.